What is Dragonlance? So obviously with the announcement of Dragonlance Shadow of the Dragon Queen, there's been a lot of excitement from a large amount of the player base over the reintroduction of Dragonlance, which we have not had in quite some time as an official setting from Wizards of the Coast in the Dungeons and Dragons sphere. And like many players, I started playing in a post Dragonlance world after Dragonlance had stopped being officially supported by the company and the system. So with the new Dragonlance book mere months away, I wanted to take some time and go down the Dragonlance rabbit hole, the rabbit hole of Krynn, to see what the setting was all about and whether or not I should be excited about this new setting. And I'm going to share my findings with you all so you can determine whether or not you should be excited by this new setting. So first off, I want to look at the description of Dragonlance Shadow of the Dragon Queen. I keep wanting to say War of the Shadow Queen because war is a big part of Dragonlance. you will find. So I want to read that, and then through my research, I will contextualize what the descriptor of the book is. So it says Takissis. Once again, I have read a lot of words about Dragonlance. I have not heard a lot of words about Dragonlance. So if I'm mispronouncing them, let me know down below. Takissis, the Dragon Queen, has returned to the world of Krynn. Across the land, her armies of fanatical draconians wage a brutal war of conquest. As the dragon armies march on the unprepared nation of Solamnia, only the defenders of the city of Kalaman stand in their way, but the dragon armies want more than just to crush their foes. An ancient evil in the Dragon Queen's service seeks a magical weapon that could dominate Krynn for all time. Okay, that is the story of Shadow of the Dragon Queen. I almost did it again. So what does all of that mean? Well, I am glad that you asked. So at a very high level, Dragonlance is a epic fantasy setting with a pretty straightforward sense of morality. Good galvanizes together to stand as one. Evil turns in on itself and attacks itself internally. I will say through my research, there are more than a couple similarities to Tolkien's writing. I'm not saying that anybody stole anything. I think every fantasy writer was influenced by Tolkien to a certain extent. But some of them are a lot more obvious than others. Additionally, there are a lot of things that remind me of Westeros and A Song of Ice and Fire, which obviously came after Dragonlance. So there's a lot of connective tissue. If you're a big fan of fantasy, then I feel like Dragonlance is an interesting connecting point in like the 1980s, where it's a distinctly post Tolkien world, but it's pre kind of the 90s edgy, darker fantasy that we got into the 2000s. This is a very optimistic fantasy world while still acknowledging the darkness that resides in a lot of people. So it's an interesting stepping stone from a fantasy standpoint. And that's the interesting thing about Dragonlance is it started as a trilogy of books. I think 3 books came out before the D&D setting got going with Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and we started getting the modules and all this kind of stuff. So at a very high level, that is what Dragonlance is epic, pure fantasy. Now, once we get into the next step down of the heavy hitters and kind of what type of games you can hope to run in Dragonlance, things start to get a little bit more nuanced. So I'm going to save like what kind of games for towards the end of the video, just because that's more like practical knowledge, and we're learning about Dragonlance right now. So the history of Dragonlance, and this is an interesting setting because unlike something like Eberron that has a fixed point in time, since it was introduced in 3rd or 3.5, your campaign starts on the same date back then as it does now in 5th edition. 4 years after the Day of Mourning, 2 years after the Treaty of Thronehold. Whereas Dragonlance has had an evolving timeline, much like Forgotten Realms, where the novels have come out and kind of pushed the timeline forward and things like that. So And they're doing something interesting with this new 5th edition iteration. But so there are 3 continents in the world of Krynn. There are 3 gods, 3 true gods, and there are 3 moons, which relate to how magic is used. And we saw that with the playtest material, with the different feats, the leveled feats that they introduced in that. So let's talk about the gods real quick. So wild thing, when I read Dragonlance 1, the very first adventure, the campaign that they dropped, if you're coming over from another campaign, like another world, another setting, and you're a cleric or a druid, you don't have any powers until you give your devotion to the true gods. But it's not just it reminds me of The Office, where Michael walks out and just screams, "I declare bankruptcy." Like, just because you declare yourself with the true gods, that's nothing. That means nothing. So it was wild to see like heretic clerics and paladins that don't worship one of the true gods have no power here. Anyway, there are 3 gods, 3 true gods, 3 moons, and 3 continents. Based on the description of the book, this setting, this adventure will take place on the continent of Ansalon. So that's where I'm going to be focusing this video, because it's relevant to whether or not you want to buy Shadow of the Dragon Queen. So Ansalon is divided up into, once again, 3 different sections of the north, the middle, and the south. The north is divided up between nomadic civilizations in the form of the Nordmar and the nation that we saw in the description of the book, Solamnia. Those are the 2 northern kingdoms. Like I said, the Nordmar are nomadic peoples. They have a king of the north in Northkeep, and yeah, so that's their deal. Solamnia is the land of knights and tradition and chivalry, and so very, once again, that I think when people think like iconic Dungeons and Dragons, like the schmaltzy knight with the banner and the riding the horse across the green fields and all that kind of stuff, I think that this is where that comes from, is this idea of Solamnia, because it is a very very regal nation and untouched by the War of the Lance until it wasn't, when one of the antagonists in the book marched an army up there with Lord Soth, who is a Death Knight. So yeah, that's and Lord Soth also, I'm not gonna say it's just 1 letter away from Sith. I'm just saying. And I don't know the exact release order of the extended universe Star Wars books when the notion of Sith got introduced, because it wasn't introduced in the original trilogy. That term never gets used. So I don't know. There's just an interesting overlap there of Lord Soth and the Sith as like the dark force users in Star Wars. Anyway, lots of side tangents. So that's when Solamnia gets touched by the War of the Lance, and bad things finally start happening to that once regal nation. And Death Knights as a concept also were born with Lord Soth. We wouldn't have Death Knights in D&D without Lord Soth. He was the originator of this kind of template. And you think about like the Grave Cleric, the Oathbreaker Paladin. There's a lot of interesting character subclasses that I think can have some connective tissue to Lord Soth. So anyway, it's an interesting aspect. And then the southern part of the continent of Ansalon, the middle. I'm jumping from the north to the south. The middle is kind of the wildlands. It's swamps, mountains, seas. Basically, if you wanted to run an exploration heavy campaign where the party was having to like go into the wild unknown, largely unknown, then you would send them into the middle of Ansalon. There's also Mount Nevermind, which is where the gnomes live, which is just wild. Mount Nevermind. I need to go deeper to figure out why it's called Nevermind, because either it's like Mount Nevermind or Mount Nevermind. And then in the south, you have the 2 elven kingdoms, the Qualinesti and the Sylvanesti. Which they're both seem pretty chill. They don't like each other that much based on my research, but they seem nice enough. It's a nicer section than the middle and parts of the north, especially with the war going on. So, and then down at the very bottom, you have a wall of ice keeping their equivalent of Antarctica, blocked off from the rest of the civilized world. Once again, Lil Westerosi, but it wasn't so much so that I was like, George R. R. Martin is a thief. It was just like, oh, that seems familiar kind of thing. And I know I'm skipping over a lot of stuff for you hardcore Dragonlance nerds. Let me know what I'm missing down below. This is meant to be a very high level kind of discussion about the setting to let people know if it sounds intriguing to them before they go out and pick up the book. So anyway, we then have the ages of Krynn, which are the Age of Starbirth, the Age of Dreams, the Age of Might, the Age of Despair, and the Age of Mortals, which is present time. For the setting as it existed. Once again, they're doing something interesting with the 5th edition version. So Age of Starbirth is the Mythic Era. It's when the gods were created, or the gods created everything. It's not really a time that's playable. The most notable thing is Paladin, who is essentially Dragonlance's Bahamut, and Takhisis, names sound familiar, which is basically Dragonlance's Tiamat, created all the dragons, and then Takhisis corrupted some of the dragons, made the chromatic dragons, and began her conquest of world domination. So, for fans of other settings, essentially this the Dragon Queen is Tiamat, basically, being reductive and simplistic for people that have never heard of the setting. So that's interesting because we've already had Rise of Tiamat, but at the same time, it's Dragonlance. So you have to have dragons be a centerpiece of the campaign that you're producing for it, right? That would have been weird if they were like, well, we've already done a Tiamat thing, so I guess we won't. So anyway, that is the notable thing in the Age of Starbirth, is the dragons were created by Dragonlance Bahamut and Dragonlance Tiamat. Next up is the Age of Dreams, which was about 8,000 years, I think. The High Ogre civilization rose up and enslaved humans. And then one of the ogres released the slaves because he thought slavery was bad. And the humans rose up and killed their masters. Or, like, didn't kill all of them, but, revolted to no longer be subservient to the ogres. Then the ogres were cursed so that their outer appearance would reflect their evil inside. So at one point in Krynn's history, we had a bunch of hot ogres walking around. And the fact that it's not set during that time period is the true travesty of all of this. But anyway, also during the Age of Dreams, we had the Dragon Wars starting up. Apparently the first two happened, weren't a huge deal. The third Dragon War is a big deal because Paladin, Dragonlance's Bahamut, led a group of heroes to the Dragonlances. That's the name of the setting. So Dragonlances are weapons specifically engineered to kill dragons. There are two types of Dragonlances. There's a greater Dragonlance that utilizes both artifacts, the Hammer of Crossis, Hammer of Cross, and the Silver Arm of Urgoth. Hammer of Karas, and the Silver Arm of Urgoth. If you use both of those to create a Dragonlance, it is a greater Dragonlance. If you only use one of them, it's a lesser Dragonlance. So that's what that is. Dragonlances are iconic weapons that are used to kill dragons in the third Dragon War is when they first got used. And they don't have to be lances. That's just the name. They could be swords or arrowheads, I guess, or axes or hammers or any other weapon, I think. That's based on my research. It could be any weapon, really. But anyway, the Age of Might is like the most documented age. It's when a lot of bad stuff and wars and all that kind of stuff happened. We saw the rise of the Ishtar and the rise of the King Priest were the two big notable events from a historical standpoint. The King Priest is meant to be a moral authority, so of course it gets corrupted, and one of the King Priests tries to become a god. That was the end of the Age of Might. Was the current King Priest got 13 omens saying please don't, but he ignored them and tried to become a god. So the gods threw a mountain down on the city, and then they left the world. So that's that. Next up is the Age of Despair, baby. This one is short. It's like just over 300 years. And it's like the beginning of the setting, I think. Like when we look at the novels and the Dragonlance campaign, we're set in the Age of Despair is where we're setting things. And so you have the heroes from the novels and all this stuff running around and trying to get them out of the Age of Despair. Yeah. And it's not a great time. There's a thing called a Chaos War. One of the heroes from the books tries to become a god, and I don't think that ends well for anyone. So yeah, it's a bad time. It's called Age of Despair. Next up is the Age of Mortals. Age of Mortals is the current time in Dragonlance. It's the furthest the timeline has gotten forward. Takhisis wages a war of souls to try and become the sole god of Krynn. She fails, is stripped of her immortality and killed once and for all, but Paladin also is stripped of his immortality, and that is everything as of the most recent novels, I believe. So yeah, that is the setting. Now, in the context of that description of the book that we got, though. So, most notable thing is Dragonlance, Shadow of the Dragon Queen, is a prequel. It's taking place in the Age of Despair, which is when the War of the Lance took place, not during the Age of Mortals, which is the furthest ahead the timeline has gotten. So this is not a continuation of the Dragonlance story as we have left it off with the novels and everything else. We're rewinding the clock. Because as you also may have picked up on, at the very end of that recap, I mentioned that Takhisis is dead. And she is very clearly not in Shadow of the Dragon Queen. So we're going back into the Age of Despair, which seems like, I mean, it's when the novels and everything in the campaign took place. So we're kind of going back to the roots of Dragonlance and when it all began, which I'm not against. And you know, we are fighting against these great forces in the middle of this big war in this formerly idyllic nation that has been invaded by this big evil army led by a big evil dragon. Cool. And this seems like a very straightforward story, for lack of a better way to put it, because it's good versus evil. Clearly the evil dragon. I would be shocked if Paladin does not make an appearance in this adventure as like a helpful entity that helps guide the players. What interests me the most is the divine, because during the Age of Despair, the gods have turned their backs on Krynn. They have left. They are no longer helping, and they are no longer fueling clerics and paladins, things like that, unless you have special artifacts to facilitate that. So how that manifests itself is very interesting. We also have some other interesting bits in that, like, there's no canonically like drow or underdark to speak of in Krynn. There's just some iconic D&D things that aren't in this setting. And so obviously if they do Adventurers League stuff for Dragonlance, then there may be rules saying you can't play this or this or this. But for home games, obviously you can find a place for anything. Especially with the introduction of Spelljammer prior to this, like, oh yeah, we're spelljammed over here from Faerun. So yeah, running games in Dragonlance. What is that going to look like? So obviously we are going to have the set Shadow of the Dragon Queen adventure, which will give us Dragonlance in that form. What and you'll be able to play along with that and defeat Takhisis and defeat Lord Soth and the armies invading Solamnia, which is great. But more so, what is going to be intriguing is trying to build campaigns in the larger world of Ansalon and Krynn in general, because the mechanics are the thing I'm most interested to see how they do it, if they do it. Because older rules, and I kind of got into this in my Spelljammer videos, where, you know, some of the older rules just don't translate well to 5th edition with the more narrative-focused gameplay. So, and there's a ton of stuff from Eberron, from the 3.5 version, with, like, being in a manifest zone, amplifying certain schools of magic, things like that, that just aren't in the new books. But, you know, magic users' magic ability of the 3 different robe colors associated with the 3 different moons, black, white, red, their magic would be more or less powerful based on the lunar cycles and things like that. And so are we going to see anything to reflect that? Something I do like is having those associations through feats, though, as opposed to saying like wizards are this and warlocks are that. You can be any kind of magic user, wizard, warlock, bard, sorcerer, and take a feat to determine which moon you're associated with. So it'll be interesting to see in the actual canonized material how they utilize the lunar cycles, if they utilize the lunar cycles. Same with how the divine spell casting is going to work with the gods. If we're just going to have kind of a hand wavy, part of your starting equipment is this artifact that connects you to the true gods, and you can cast magic. It will be interesting to see how they accomplish that. We are also getting war tactics in this. If I go back to the description of the book, just to kind of continue, World at War introduces war as a genre to play 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. Dragonlance introduces the Dragonlance setting, yada, yada, yada. Heroes of War provides character creation rules highlighting the core elements, including the Kender, and backgrounds for the Knights of Solamnia and the Mage of High Sorcery magic users, introducing lunar sorcery, sorcerer subclass with new spells to bind your character to Krynn's 3 mystical moons and imbue the lunar magic. I'll be interested to see how they do that. And villains, so it'll have the iconic like Lord Soth and Takissis and all that kind of stuff. I know I'm pronouncing Takissis wrong, but I don't care. So not that I know, you get what I'm saying. So is the lunar cycle thing only going to apply to the sorcerer and not all magic users? Because that's not, at least according to the setting, how that generally worked. But obviously they're willing to change anything. So that is Dragonlance in a nutshell, and what it is and whether or not you should be excited about it. If you're looking for a fun, straightforward, epic fantasy, good versus evil, no complicated, gray morality of like Lord Soth might be redeemed. No, he's a Death Knight. He's bad. He's evil. He's an evil person. Takissis is bad. He's evil. Kill the Dragon Queen. The heroes are good. The villains are bad. And that's that. So let me know down below if you're excited about Dragonlance, if you are excited to play in the setting, or just excited for more people to get to experience the setting. I feel like a lot of the hype around this is built off the back of the nostalgia of the books. When I go onto like Reddit and all these different places and try to find out why people are excited about Dragonlance, a lot of it is the books, not the campaign settings, the books. Like, especially that original trilogy of Dragonlance novels hold a big piece in a lot of people's hearts. And I think that's why they're excited about it. So I'll be interested to see if that excitement translates into the actual game. Thank you all so much for watching. I've been Eric, and I will see you next time.